Welcome back, Inebri-ites. This is Andy, the Inebri-art podcast, and due to social distancing rules and regulations, I am once again recording from my house because we are no longer recording in person due to social distancing. We are able to get some people that we wouldn't normally get, and today joining me from France is Wax Tailor. Welcome to the show, man.
You hear me?
Oh, you still there? Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It looks like for a moment I had no more sound, but yeah.
That's all right. That happens, especially when we're doing kind of these long distance things. But welcome to the show. So, just before we kind of even get into who you are and what you do, how is it going over there in France? We get the news reports, but what's it like on the ground?
Well, it's a tough period. I'm not sure that there is it's like for you guys at the moment in the US, like it's complicated. It's same and different at the same time. We were not expecting for this, and it's very complicated. It brings some positive elements sometimes from some perspective about just getting time to think about many things, but mainly it's a weird and dark period. So we just hope for the end of the tunnel, like everybody, just expecting for the next episode and being able to go back to a normal life. Yeah.
Yeah. Over here, it's been very heartwarming, on a personal level, to see kind of friends all kind of pitch in and, check it. I mean, I've been getting text messages from people I haven't talked to in like a year or so, just, check in, see what's going on. Overall, it's a little frustrating because Americans are very obsessed with their freedom and don't really understand what that is and think that they don't have to follow health and safety guidelines. Can be very frustrating. But all in all, most people here are healthy and trying to do the right thing. And so that's kind of where we're at. But,
I see that because in the US or in France, the media most of the time they do talk a lot about people who are not doing what they should. Mm-hmm. But even if you got like 15% people not doing the right way, it means that you still got 85% that are doing exactly what we need to do. And I don't want to be like the so positive guy, but it's always easy to just show that people are not doing what they, and beyond that, the only thing that I see also about this situation is just bringing the worst about the social difference. Mm-hmm. And because for some people, it's nearly like a good opportunity just to think about their life and getting some distance and going to the second house near the beach or whatever. Like in France, it's kind of things like you had like something like 500,000 people from Paris just moving to better places. Yeah. And same in New York, I've seen that. So, but in the same time, you got some workers, and I'm just thinking about that. Just that it's just showing also the kind of society we do live in.
Yeah, and it's one of those things you always kind of have to keep in mind that the news always seems negative because they're telling you and this isn't like a throwing shade on the news, but it's like, they don't report on the person staying home doing all the right things because that's not really newsworthy. So you don't hear about that 85% doing the right thing.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah. So what were you up to before all this? Were you touring? Were you doing club gigs? Like what was a day in the life of Wax Tailor back in February?
Well, actually, I was in a process for my next album. Mm-hmm. I've been lucky enough to move to Cape Town in South Africa in January. I was in the process of the album over there, and just came back in February before Armageddon. And so next, I mean, it's weird because when when I'm back home, my friends, the current joke for my friend was like, okay, you're the one who you don't suffer from the lockdown because you live like that. You're in a studio and you're not so social and all that. Yeah. But it's not. It's partly true and it's partly not true because the fact is that it was it's a huge impact on your mental and everything. And because I was in the process of this album, I had a tour that was planned already, coming tour, and I've seen that around me a lot of people there was like two kind of reactions. Some people were in the denial, like I had some people around me, they wanted to think that it would be clear in 2 months, and it was like, guys, I think you don't want to see what's going on. Like, and I was the one who was more like, okay, we're in it for 2 years now. It's going to be a long process. I don't, like the economical thing and everything. I was like, okay, it's going to be very longer. So I had to postpone the project about touring and everything. So for a moment, I was thinking probably I'm going to have to postpone the album too, because you know how all things can be linked. But finally, I was just thinking, no, I don't want to. I was just thinking, I just want to focus about music. Like, no more strategy, brainstorm, whatever. Just do the music, and we'll see next. So now I'm in the process, and actually, it's getting better. Like, I'm really in the process of the album. I'm just trying to focus about that.
Nice. So you said you were in Cape Town, South Africa. Is there a big music scene there? I feel like I keep hearing more and more. And it's one of those, like, I don't know if, Cape Town just popped on my radar. So then you kind of like, every time you hear it, you kind of like, your ears perk up. But I just hear more and more about Cape Town in general. Is there a music scene? Is up and coming place? Like,
actually, it's growing. It's growing. And I've heard probably for 5-6 years now, more and more people talking to me about Cape Town. And this is a place where I never been before. So 2 years ago, I was like, okay, maybe I should go and check, like, just days off, and had the chance to go and just check for it. And first of all, the place is amazing. So that's one thing. It's kind of complex with the history of South Africa, and still like those kind of invisible barrier. I would call it like that, like, okay, everybody got the same rights, supposed to, something like that.
On paper.
Yeah. On paper, like it's like you're in New York, you're in Tribeca, and you're welcome. I mean, if you got some dollars.
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing, but there is something. There is a scene, and it's a nice town, and there's a lot of musicians, and it's growing. Yeah.
Nice. So how did you kind of get into? Like, I feel like when you talk to musicians in general, they pick up the drums or guitar. It's usually like in high school. That kind of, they want to be a rock star. How do you become a DJ producer? How does that happen? Like, was it high school?
Something like let's call it an accident.
Okay.
But it just came through the hip hop culture. I think the meeting was with the hip hop culture in the mid 80s and late 80s. I was really into this, and that was really the big moment for this culture in France, when it just came through the ocean, and that was the growing scene. And in the early 90s, I just wanted to be part of this. And I think when you were part of this hip-hop culture, for this period, it was not so much about thinking, I want to be a musician, I just wanted to be part of it. Mm-hmm. So I've tried everything around, like dancing, graffiti, and I was really awful on everything. So I just came to the music. I can't even explain how it came, and but finally I've realized, because I was writing for a moment. I was an MC at first, and I mean, probably I've done it first because I had no opportunity to have everything like a sampler and everything. But as soon as I have been able to buy a sampler and a few gear for making music, I've just focused about that, and it just came like that. But then you said, like, it's funny because you said, like, when you're at high school you want to be a rock star. Yeah, I've had this period too, like around 20, like it was not rock star, it was more like a rap superstar.
Yeah.
It's the same process. I was sure that I would be the best in France or whatever, and then you realize that it's probably it's going to be more complicated than you were expecting, and 10 years after you realize that you were stupid.
Yeah, well, that's just maturity telling you,
Yeah.
But I think that that blind, I don't know if it's blind faith or immaturity, that those, early.
I mean, it's important. For me, it's important. Like, like when, like sometimes when people say, like, oh, this young fella is 18, he's arrogant. And I say, of course he's arrogant and is right to be arrogant. Like,
Right.
I think, like, 18 years old musician, 20 years old musician, they need to be arrogant because that's why they're fresh, or most of the time. Like, if you're just, you don't have to excuse yourself, like saying, like, I'm so sorry, I know it's not so good what I'm doing. No, you need to think that you're going to kill everything. I think it's part, especially in the hip hop culture, it's part of it.
Yeah, and I feel like hip hop and rock always try to kind of be on the edge, and you can't be edgy and apologetic.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So is hip hop like really big in France, or is it kind of an underground thing? Unfortunately, I've never been to France, but
actually, France is the second market in the world for hip hop.
Really?
Yeah, and there is a big reason for that. In the mid 90s, 94 actually, we had like a cultural minister, and he decided to do a law to protect the French expression. It was kind of an awful law, actually. But the good thing is that at this period, the radio, they because of the law, they had to put on air like 50% of French music. And at this period, there were, and when I say French music, I mean talking French, not like only like for me, like what I'm doing at the moment. I'm not into this. Like I can be count as a French artist because everything I'm doing is the expression is English, so it's not into this law. But because of this, they needed to find some music to program, and there were not so many French singers at this period in the early 90s. Most of them, they were doing like English expression or whatever.
Yeah.
So the main tunnel they had for that was the French rap. So one of the radio at this period was Skyrock. It's funny because it's the biggest hip hop station, and the name is Skyrock. But they decided to switch to this kind of music, and it just went really, really big, really big. And when at this period, it was really huge, like 96, 97, 98 was any French rap release was like gold, platinum, whatever. It was huge, insane. And then it was still there, like it was a big thing, and it was mainstream. But for 4-5 years now, there is like a second golden age about that.
Yeah.
With the youngest, like the trap music. And it's maybe even bigger than in the 90s. Like it's a nonsense. Like we've never had anything like that at the moment. Like, like it's like a joke. You got some new bands, new rap artists. You never heard about them when you're 40 like me. Probably if you're 15, you know about those guys. But
yep.
I feel like it's always like 3 letters. Like I feel like all their names are 3 letters, and you hear about those guys and you feel like, oh, it must be new. I've never heard about that. And you go on Spotify and you realize that they got like 20 million views or something like that. And you feel like, oh shit, I'm old.
Yeah. I'm glad you say that, because I go through that all the time. Where like I think it was Billie Eilish I found out about, and I'm like, oh, check out her music, and I'm like, oh, that's not bad. And then like a week later, she's on Saturday Night Live, and
yeah,
she's just like this huge act. I'm like, I've never heard of this person before.
Yeah, and especially in a rap scene at the moment in France, but of course same in the US. Sometimes I just discover some artist and I feel like wow, I really thought it was underground, and you check for something and you feel like okay, 100 million views. Okay, I'm lost.
Do you think that? Because I find that happens all the time, and I just don't. Especially here in the U.S., I feel like radio is. I mean, it's still around, but it's becoming more centralized. Where local radio is kind of going away, and it's more syndicated radio shows. And I hate when. Like they have like the classic rock stations, and you're like, this is the stuff from when I was in high school. Classic rock is like the Beatles. But I feel like there's less and less new music on the radio. Is that something that you guys are experiencing in France, or?
It's I could say yes. I don't. I'm not sure that I can answer. Just for one reason is that I'm listening less and less the radios.
Yeah.
Just because I realized that even the station I was listening a few years ago, I don't listen to it so much. And but you're probably right. That's what I mean. Like you're probably right, because a few times I'm listening to the radio, I got the same feeling, but I don't listen it so much, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just feel like the younger generation gets their music in completely different ways.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm 200% sure that they really don't care about radios.
Yeah. So, how do you get your music out there? Do you rely on like YouTube? Are you getting radio play, or is it more just kind of an in-person, club experience?
Actually, it's interesting because I've realized like months ago I was just wondering about that. I was just thinking that I got no process. Like it's not like okay, I'm very organized. Here's what I'm doing. I don't know. I'm just waking up, and I think it's probably about a mixture of a lot of things, like my networks, people around me, or some friends sending this or that, just checking a few things. But I'm not so organized. Like okay, I'm checking every. Of course, yeah. By curiosity, sometimes every Friday when I think about it, I'm just checking the new releases. But it's more. It's awful to say that, but I don't. It's very rare that I feel like, wow, I'm impressed, or this is a new and very interesting thing. Most of the time, it's more like a curiosity about, just thinking how low we can go. I mean, sometimes you get some great things, but that's another problem for me about the streaming platforms, because the process is great. Like the idea of getting all the music you want is great, but it's like going to the library with nobody to explain you or help you. And I've realized I've read some numbers a few months ago. I couldn't give you the right numbers, but it was something like 80% of the music listened on Spotify is done on something like 1,000 tracks. So maybe even worse, And you just think that okay, you got millions and millions of tracks and everybody's listening to the same thing. So it's kind of depressing because you feel like you've never had such an opportunity to listen to. If I was 15 in 2020, I wouldn't sleep anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's a really valid point, because I mean, we're roughly the same age when we were younger. The TV shows here in the U.S. would have these enormous audiences because all there was regular TV. But now with cable and Netflix and Hulu and Spotify, I mean, there's so much content that if you get like 100,000 people, that's a huge audience.
And also about when you mentioned this thing about the different periods, this thing when you're turning older and you get
Let's
this
say
kind
experienced. I don't like the word older. Let's just say we're experienced.
But like some friends of mine, they're like, okay, I hear them talking and I feel like, oh, come on, don't you realize that you talk like your father was doing it, and don't do that. And I just, what I mean about that is that I will never say like, we were better for this or that. I just think it's different. And one thing that is really clear for me is that when I was 15, 18, something like that, the relation with the music was way different. I mean that I think a kid of the same age right now, he knows probably a lot, if he's into the music, for sure. He knows probably a lot more than I did at the same age, like much more references and everything. But the relation with the music is different. Like when I was 14 and buying Fear of a Black Planet from Public Enemy,
yep.
I could tell you everything about who was the assistant engineer, who was doing this, who was doing that. I was like, because I had not so much, and the link with the music was like, okay, there is a new release. I gotta catch the train on Wednesday and go to this shop and buy it. And the process was like very romantic. Like everything around the music was like such an adventure. Like I need to get this music. So and now the thing is that you get, and I don't say it's better, it's just different. Like it's not worse, better, it's just different. It's probably very, very exciting, but I realize that even for me now, I'm doing exactly what I hated 20 years ago. I remember when we were talking about A&R in big record companies, when they were listening very quickly to albums, and you were like, oh, those guys, they don't like the music because they switch. Right. And that's exactly what you do on Friday when you check the new release. I mean, most of the people, we just check very quickly because that's how we live right now. So it's just different.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I feel it's probably one of my biggest pet peeves when my generation talks about millennials, or they call them I think they call my kids Generation Z or whatever. It's the same things they said about us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Generation X, we were the slackers, and it's like we worked just as hard as everybody else. We were just damn kids. And I remember I was listening to a podcast, and they read this quote about this older guy talking about the younger generation, about how they're lazy, how they don't get it, how his generation was so much better, and like exactly the same thing that they say about millennials and they said about us, and it was Socrates. And it's like nothing changes. The older generation always thinks the younger generation is lazy, and so I just think it's one of those, like they're just younger, they're just kids, they're doing the same things that we did. It's just different.
Yeah, but the only thing that you can say from my point of view, when we got those kind of discussion about like, I just think that we can, the one thing that we can talk about is not the generation itself, but the society where this generation live in. Mm-hmm. I mean that I grew up in the 80s, 90s, mm-hmm. and we were already considering that our parents had maybe a better generation, because they were the boomers just coming after the war, and everything was positive. Like they had this vibe. Of course, like there was a lot, especially in the US, there was a lot to win about the social rights and everything. But mainly there was something growing and something positive, like expecting that it's going to be better and better and better. And our generation, I think it was already like coming with unemployment and the beginning of this movement. And so now I feel that for the youngest coming now, I just feel like probably was better for us, like it was for our parents.
Yeah.
And probably our parents, it was better than. So that's for me the only thing that we can compare. Thinking that for me, like my age, my grandparents had a tough life, my parents had a better life. And I just feel like for us it was different, and the next one I don't know. So this is the only thing when we compare. I will never say like we were more this or that. It's just a different. It's not a different generation, just a different context.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. So you've obviously been making music for quite a while. Have you found that your music has changed? Are you still kind of very similar to how when you started? I mean, obviously everyone goes through growth, but do you try to to like really push your boundaries and explore new avenues and work with new people?
Well, I do, but you know this thing about when people say this is like a running gag about, oh, this is the album of the maturity.
Yeah.
This thing, I just feel that I always say that like a joke when say, well, what about the new album? So I think it's the one of the maturity, but I say that because I don't buy this. And for me, my first album came like 15 years ago now, and for me, if I had one about maturity, was this one. Doesn't mean that next it was not good or whatever, but I had like 10 years before just searching. Like 20 to 30 for me was really about searching, just copying a lot of things that I was listening to and just trying to find how to define myself with the music. And I think when I released my first album, I was 30 and it was late. Mm-hmm. And actually was the right moment for me, like the moment I was free. I was free because like what we said earlier, I was not expecting to be a rock star anymore. I was not expecting even to live with the music, whatever. I just wanted to leave something behind me that was really me and what I had in my mind, in my soul. And from this point next, from album to album, I've just tried to open doors. And to be honest with you, I just try to make different things on every album. But if I watch back, it's not so different. I just try to do it. And I don't know if it's a good point or a bad point. That's how it is. But I think I got something inside of me. And even if I try like an elastic to go very far from the previous album, I realize at the end, I can feel the difference. I feel like, oh yeah, I've done this, I've done that. That this is the kind of things I was not doing before. But it's kind of cosmetic. It's not like a huge change from an album. Like, oh wow, I've made a complete change about the music. At the end, I think it's I'm more this kind of musician, like with something like a stamp on the music. Like you like it, probably you'll follow me for long. And if you don't like it so much, probably you'll feel like, okay, I got a few tracks because I'm not so much into it. Or maybe I can completely hear the thing about like he's doing quite the same thing all the time. I don't think it's true, but I can hear it. Like, and the more I'm getting older, the more I feel comfortable with that, because I just feel like I'm just trying to be honest with me and what I want to do and express what I got inside. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Well, it's always funny. There's that fine line between, being a consumer of music. You want your band or the band you're listening to sound like the band you're listening to, but be different. It's like if you're a Metallica fan and they go completely outside the box and come out with a country album, you're going to be like, well, this isn't Metallica, blah, blah. Yeah. You want it to sound like Metallica. So it's this weird kind of combination of you want it to sound similar, but not the same.
Yeah. The thing is that about that is for me, the more important is that if you do the same kind of music, let's say, even if it doesn't mean so much, but if you do the same kind of music, it needs to be because you just feel like that, not like because you fear that people are lost or whatever. I'm really not afraid about that. Like I've never felt like, oh, I need to make sure that I keep like my the people who follow me or whatever. I just feel like I just offer you something. I'm not here to. It's like for the live show. I remember like a few years ago, I've made an album that was a concept album with a story and everything. Yeah. And for me, it was very important to bring the live show at the same level. Like, and it was a bit different than what I was doing usually. It was more like like theater. And my live producer was very scared. Like, okay, people they'll be lost and all that. And I think that most of the time people are just not considering that people get sensibility and they don't bet on the sensibility of the people. Like they just anticipate, like, okay, they think like that. You don't know how they think. So I just think that you need to go straight to what you feel, and then you'll see. That's it.
So a lot of times I ask musicians like, what's their process for making their music? Do they start with a melody? Do they start with a beat? Do they start with lyrics? I'm really curious on how you start because, you know, for whatever genre of music I can kind of wrap my head around it, I wouldn't even begin to know how to make music that is very predominantly like electronically generated with, you know, samplers and that sort of thing. It's very, is it more, I'm assuming it would be more technical than.
For me, there is not one rule. Like it's not like it's always like that. But the one thing that I got that I can put in the in comparison to every track is that I need what we call, I don't know if it's a hook, a gimmick, or something like that. It can be, you know, I'm building my own instruments with some samples.
Yeah.
Most of the people, when we talk about sampling music, for a lot of people, it's like using loops or using a melody or something. For me, most of the time, it's sharpening some sounds and just rebuilding some melodies. And it's like, if I had a comparison to make, I would say, like, you know, you're in front of a keyboard, and if you got a piano, a Fender Rhodes, or an organ, you won't play the same way. So it's a lot about that. Like I need a sound, and when I got a sound, I'm searching for something, and sometimes I just got something like a gimmick, a very short thing, and it's just like the moment I feel I got this thing, I can build everything around, and it can even be something else. Like I remember a long time ago, I was digging for some dialogues on a movie, and I was just watching a movie, and at one point there was a phrase, and I was completely locked on the phrase, like, wow, because for me it was music, like the rhythm of the words, and I just needed to stop it, just wreck the phrase and put it on my software and be like, okay, just playing with that, like the music, just everything just came around. And for me, it's funny because it was an old movie from the 50s, and no link with absolutely no link with that, but I could hear some bossa nova. So I've just searched for bossa nova sounds and trying to make a bossa nova track. And I don't know, sometimes it's just about what you got in mind, like inspiration. But I always need this, like sometimes I got a melody, something, and I'm building from craft, like with just MIDI notes, and then find for some good arrangement and sounds. But most of the time I come first with the sound. Yeah.
It's funny. You just made me think of something. Back, I'd say in my late high school, early college years, I was very much into kind of like industrial music out of Chicago, like Ministry and KMFDM and My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, and they were always taking samples out of old movies, and maybe not even that old movies. Just little phrases that they would work into their music. And there was one that I had stumbled across at that time that I kind of just forgot about till just about now, that I always thought, I'm like, oh, this kind of fits that whole vibe for that music. And I don't know why I know this, but it was in the very first episode of the Monkees TV show. Did you guys ever get that?
Yeah.
And it's like kind of towards the end. And if I remember right, the Monkees were trying to like play somewhere, and it was kind of stuffy, and they didn't want this, rock band playing there. And then at the end, they're playing, and everyone's dancing, and this old guy is like, kind of getting into the music, and he's like, "I'm in terrible pain, but I think I like it." And I'm like, "Oh my god, that's a great sample that should be in like a."
Yeah. Sometimes you can hear it. It's like putting the words out of the context, and just you get the vision about it. Like, okay, this needs to be on something else, and just try to build around that. Yeah.
Do you ever kind of be out about your day or whatever, and hear something mechanical running, or just kind of the ambient noises around you that kind of is rhythmic, and that do you kind of like pick up on that and gives you ideas?
It happens. It can happen, and for a period, it's not about periods. Like I remember, like something like 7-8 years ago, I was really obsessed with that. Like trying to, I had like a small a portable rack and with a microphone and everything, and I just try to bring it with me with a bag all the time, and just and for my third album, actually, I've made a lot of recording outside, like some moods, because I knew that I wanted to have like a kind of urban mood all around the album. So I just went to I went to New York, and I had the chance to travel at this period. So it was very interesting to capture the sound of different towns and see, like everything around. Like, at this period, I went to India. When you arrive in New Delhi, it's such another world about the sounds and the noise and everything. So it's always very interesting. And sometimes I still get it like even like very different. But like you said, it can also be like just a mixture of different sounds that you hear around you, and you feel like this is musical. But Then I've tried to put it on the side, because it's kind of obsessional at one point, and you just need to enjoy what you're doing, not being obsessed about that.
Yeah. People trying to talk to you like, shh, 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 I'm listening to the dishwasher.
Yeah, exactly. Especially for the people around you.
So if someone was interested in getting into kind of, making music like you and sampling it, and again, I'm going to throw it back to like the rock band. It's easy. Like, hey, you want to go out and be in a rock band, pick up a guitar, pick up a drum kit. Like, what is the beginner thing that like every DJ or person who's going to make electronic music, what's the one device that they need?
It's never been. I think. I mean, it's never been so easy. It's never been so easy. Like you need a. It's not even, because that's another question that I've heard for years and years, like about what, for example, like what would you recommend? How would you process? And I just feel like it's not the right question, because I've seen during years and years, like so many producers, whatever you call them, beat makers, composers, whatever, and using very different tools, very different whatever. And it's all about the creativity. And I really believe that. Like I've seen some guys working with some supposed to be so amateur tools and making such a great work, and some others with like the full pack of what's supposed to be like the greatest musician on earth, and like still no soul, no nothing. So it's not so complicated. And then like these things we were talking about earlier, like in the 90s, like the process to get a record, to buy a vinyl, and it's quite the same. I remember at this period, like it was very complicated, and that's the one thing that I was saying, like there is no better, like when we talk about like the music, and as a listener, it's not better in the 90s or now, but for a musician arriving now, it's way, way, way better. Because you don't need to work for 3 months to get the right tools to work, or you can do it with any stupid, very slow computer, and you'll have 10 times better options than we had at this period. So if you are creative, you don't need so much, and there's so many. And I realize that now when we talk about technology, most of the kids coming now, 20 or even younger, they know way better than me what to use, because I could learn from them. Like I'm not like the one so informed. I'm just the old guy using his things, and I'm still curious and just finding things. But it's like the music, like we're talking about this thing, like when you discover something and you realize it's already big. It's quite the same for the technology. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking with some friend and said, you know what, I've discovered this, and they're like, JC, we use it for 2 years now.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not, and again, I'm laughing about that, because I could say, oh, it's a drama, I'm lost, but I don't care. We know that it's nothing. It's just it's not about that. It's just about being creative, and it's always good to be curious and find and still connected with what's happening. But it's more about making sure that you get the right tools to to do your thing and you sing first. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of those tools now are so readily available and free.
Oh yeah.
We use Audacity to edit this podcast. Shout out to
Sure.
Audacity, but it's free. It doesn't cost us anything. And
no, and actually, you get some free tools sometimes. I'm even surprised myself because you can do things with free tools, and you get your software that you buy like $1,000, and you realize that this codec, for example, is not for free, and it is for free on the supposed to be. So those kind of things. So it's just about making sure that you just get informed about what you can find, and it's easy.
So, what are you listening to now that's kind of influencing your music? Any particular bands that is in your Spotify playlist?
That's a good question. Like for, I've realized that we were talking about hip hop. I told you earlier that for the past years, when I say past years, I mean like, I don't know, like time's running fast, maybe 5 years, something like that. I think rap music is more exciting than it was in 2010, 2005, around that. For me, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was way more nostalgic about the 90s. Like the 90s, this discussion, this eternal discussion about like it was better before. Mm-hmm. I think it's not the right angle. If you talk about psych rock, it would be stupid to deny that the late 60s was the moment. Right. So it's same for like the boom bap sampling music, like early 90s, like 93, 94. Like you can compete with that. Like there is no chance to compete with that. But the good thing at this period is that it's something else. Like rap is so mainstream nowadays that you can't compare a supposed to be underground movement to the huge mainstream thing. Rap music nowadays is the pop music of the 2020. That's it. So you can compare those two periods. But I got to say, there is more and more creativity. And it's interesting to see that you see, like 5 years ago, I remember when Kendrick Lamar released Pimp a Butterfly. I was kind of surprised because it was like number one, and I was thinking I like this album actually, and I don't feel like it's a lazy album, easy, cheesy for the radio. I just feel like it's cultural. There is a lot of references. I can feel where it comes from. I can feel the backbone of this music, and there's a lot of cats I could name like that, like new artists, youngers, and I feel like they're doing a great job. I mean, I've just wrecked a track with D-Smoke. I just feel like I really like what he's doing. I like a lot of new artists like that, and except that this year I was wondering, like this week, what was my preferred album for 2020 from now. I think it's Alexandra Savior. I really like this album. I think I don't remember the name of the producer, but I know it's on Danger Mouse label, and that's a great album. Yeah.
You're just you're talking about kind of then and now, and it was just making me think about like I can't speak for France, but I was in the school in the 80s and 90s, and at that time, you listen to metal or you listen to rap or Absolutely. You listen to Grateful Dead, and I feel like nowadays, especially me personally, I feel like, and I don't know if it's maturity or just getting old or what, but now I'm like, listen to what you want, whatever you like, it doesn't matter. But I feel like that kind of cross-pollination is kind of normal now, where, if my kids listen to a wide variety of things. One of my daughter's favorite bands is Nirvana, which kind of blows my mind. But I feel like now it's more acceptable and common to be like, I like rap and I like country and I like this, and so it almost gets harder to ask people like, oh, what kind of music are you into, because everyone says, oh, I listen to everything.
I perfectly hear that, but I just think also that it's just one example, but I've just mentioned this thing about hip hop. When I was into this culture, late 80s, early 90s. As a rap band, for example, like you wanted to do a show gig for the promoters, you were not an artist. You were just something like this kind of, where is your drummer? I got no drummer. What do you mean you got no drummer? And so we had to fight. And that's one of the reasons why I think we were like, we're not like a techno. Techno is another tribe.
Yeah.
Like you said, like, no, I'm not in this tribe. Oh, metal, those guys. And we had all the cliche, we had some cliche about rock guys, electro guys, hip hop guys, because it was tribes. We had all tribes, all world. And I think everything just went in the late 90s, probably everything began to change. And I completely agree with that. Like the youngest, they really don't care about that. I really feel that. And the good thing is that probably it also helped. That's one thing interesting. I think that you got some kind of project that appeared and you were not able anymore to put a stamp like we used to. And as an example, I often use this one, but I remember like in the late 90s or mid 90s, Björk, she was an electro artist. We could say like she's an electro artist, even if she was coming from Sugar Cubs, but she was an electro with our project. And Radiohead was a rock band. And 15 years later, you just watch them and you feel like, is it so easy to say that Radiohead is a rock band and that Björk is an electro artist? I don't think so. So I think it's a lot about that, like the frontier. There is no more frontier like that. Like when you say like electronic music, like everybody's doing electronic music. Everybody's recording with a computer and software and everything. And on stage, rock bands, they got like Ableton on stage. So it's there is no more frontier like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, you know, we've been interviewing a lot of music acts lately. And, you know, I want our listeners to kind of, I mean, obviously I want our listeners to go out and check out your music, but it's always like I want them to kind of have an idea or an expectation of like what kind of music it's going to be. And that's a really hard thing to convey because, you know, back in the day, you'd be like, well, what section is your album going to be? Is it going to be the rock section or is it going to be the country section? And so I've started to ask people, I'm like, if you're going on tour, like what band would you go on tour that would make sense for your fans to see you at? And that's kind of like the best thing I could come up with as trying to not give a genre, but kind of give like a vibe or a feel to kind of like what your music is like. And who would you go on tour with that, you know, our listeners might know that would kind of make sense? Yeah.
And it's even not easy because, you see, for me, for example, like, from if you check from Europe and US and Europe and the kind of crowd you got and people what they're listening to, it's not exactly the same. So it's interesting to like I got some tracks with I got my hip hop backbones and I do tracks with some MCs, some tracks instrumental, some tracks with some singers, and mostly in the US, for example, when I'm touring, I can feel that people are more into the instrumental thing, like the more vibey and those kind of things, and they're not so much into the rap tracks. And in France, in Germany, or they are much more into the rap tracks, and it's like different tribes, but still open anyway.
So I was also checking you out on YouTube, and you have some very cool videos on there.
Thank you.
Is that when you're writing the music, do you have visuals in your head that you try to later turn into a video? Like how much is the video part of the process, or is that kind of like song comes out and then we worry about the video later?
Actually, it's interesting because I was telling you about like the gimmick, the hook, or whatever. The first thing I'm writing, and for me, the moment I know it's strong enough, it's when I got some visions about it. Like I really need to have some visions. Like and then I just developed the track, and most of the time I got a lot of visions about the track. And as an example, I can have like one track and just go and work with the director and tell him a full story about what I got in my mind about it. Feel like, okay, here's what I got in mind. And sometimes we can just go with that. Like, okay, let's develop what you got in mind. And sometimes, and more, I talk with some directors and I just say, here's what I got in mind. Or maybe sometimes I even say like, do you want to know? Because if you don't want to know, I don't tell you. Because it's also very interesting to open the door to someone else's imagination and what is his vision about the music. So everything is possible. It depends on the music video we're doing. And sometimes I'm co-directing just because I want to make sure that it goes on this right direction. And sometimes I just open doors to being surprised myself. And it's often interesting, it can go in different process. Sometimes I just bring everything I got in mind. The director said I had another vision, and I'm just like, okay, let's go with your vision. And in the middle of it, I just had some comments, and he said, "Oh, it's interesting. Let's add this." So it's just about a mixture of all those things and an exchange about that. Yeah,
that's very cool. So, I mean, the important thing, again, is to spread your music. So where can our listeners go to check you out? Websites. Obviously, I said you have a YouTube channel. They can check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the good thing nowadays that it's easy because, like everybody, I'm on all the streaming platforms. So just go and check for what's your preferred platform. And on the social networks. On Wax Tailor, sure, and I'm just around.
And they should expand their listening more than just those 1,000 songs.
Yeah, that would be great.
But so it's one of those weird things. It's like I feel like I stumble across new music now. It's almost like an effort to go out and find new music. Do you said on Fridays you look up new releases?
Mm-hmm.
I don't use Spotify much, so that's just an option. You can just go and check out whoever's got new stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's funny because you said it's like an effort now, and you mentioned also this thing about getting. Let's use your word, like being more experienced.
Yes.
Meaning that you're more than 40. And I think that of course you can't have the same vision about the music, and it's more and more complicated to be excited. And sometimes I hear some people saying, I'm still as excited as I was when I was 20. And to be honest with you, I just feel like I'm not sure I trust you when I don't believe you. Or if it's true, it's weird. Because, I mean, you can be the same once you've listened to music for 25 years and had so much behind you. It's different. It got to be different. Like I'm a huge, big hip hop fans, and I had tons of albums in the 90s that I was a huge fan. And when I watch back, let's be honest, like how many of those albums I still listen and consider as classic album? Not so much.
Yeah,
I'm kind of nostalgic when I check them because I feel, oh yeah, I remember that 92, that was great. But it doesn't mean that I feel like it's of course, if I do listen to Midnight Marauders from Tribe Called Quest, I can consider it's a classic, very, very high classic, of course. But for most of the album, it's not the same thing. So I just feel that you're 20 nowadays, you feel more excited about everything that comes, and probably in 20 years you'll reconsider what you've listened to. That's kind of logical process. So I just try to listen to everything not everything, but the more I can about what's the new release, just to know and check and see. And again, not to try to be in the thing of the moment. I don't care, but just to know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with us being more experienced. It's harder to impress because when you're younger and you mentioned Public Enemy, I mentioned Nirvana. Like when those came out, I mean, blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God, I've never heard anything like this. This is so different from everything I'm used to. And then as you get older, you're like, oh, I mean, yeah, they were covering Bowie and they were covering these other musicians.
Exactly.
And then as you get older, the amount that you're exposed to is just so much more, where something that's genuinely new and, groundbreaking is so much harder to come by.
Yeah, you're right.
But I want to say thanks for taking the time to chat with us. It's a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
And before, you were saying that you weren't sure about your English. I thought you did great, man. Probably did better than me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and so stay safe, and hopefully our listeners will check out what you have, and hopefully everything will get back to relative, or at least on the road to normalcy. That's kind of what I'm looking forward to. Just kind of
I really hope
movement.
So. Sure.
So thanks again, and that's pretty much it, man.
Thanks, man. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art, except for Instagram, we're at Inebri-art6. You can email us with your questions, complaints, and whatnot at Inebri-art@yahoo.com. And if you're looking for more podcasts, you can check out the other podcasts on our network, Retro Redoctopus, America's Hometown Horror, and, of course, Bar Talk, Old Colony, and Inebri-art Podcast, the original. So check those out and subscribe and comment so we can reach more people, and thanks for listening.